Good morning. I'm State Senator John DeSanto representing Dauphin and Perry County. Thank you for joining us here at the Pennsylvania Career Link as we take the next step in extending employment opportunities to ex-offenders and solidifying our state as first for offering second chances. Our legislation today builds on the success of our recently enacted nation-leading clean slate law by continuing to remove a criminal records lifelong barriers that unnecessarily block re-entry and productive participation in our society. More than 1 in 5 jobs require a government-issued license. Too often, qualified applicants are denied the right to work because of old or irrelevant criminal record. To this contrary to the work of our state prisons to rehabilitate and actually train inmates in a skilled profession. With nearly 3 million Pennsylvanians with some kind of criminal record and more than 95% of those incarcerated eventually being released, we must become a state that allows all its citizens to prosper and succeed. By providing pathways to work, we reduce recidivism and promote economic opportunity. If you have completed your sentence, you should not be deemed guilty when seeking an occupational license. Our proposal ends the practice of denying job licenses on the basis of criminal conviction unrelated to the occupation. Instead, our state licensing boards will be required to conduct an individualized assessment for every applicant and to take into consideration rehabilitative factors. In addition, we are proposing state boards publish fair and consistent standards for how they will consider criminal records and give interested individuals the chance to request a preliminary ruling on their specific situation before investing time and money into a training program. Why should a theft or drug conviction early in life forever prohibit you from becoming a barber, a massage therapist, or a social worker? Blanket prohibitions without considering the circumstances just don't do the applicant a disservice, but our entire Commonwealth in need of a talented workforce. By focusing on relevant criminal history and individualized reviews, we both protect the public and rehabilitate the citizens reintegrated into our community. I'm pleased by the strong bipartisan support legislation has already received, as well as a coalition of business and community leaders committed to improving our criminal justice system in a way that promotes opportunity for all. I'd now like to recognize my colleague and co-prime sponsor of SB 637, Senator Judy Schwank. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Senator DeSanto. And I'm really pleased not only to be a co-prime sponsor on this legislation, but to acknowledge the fact that over on the House side, there is another bill, a companion bill to this. This should send a message to Pennsylvania that we really are interested in helping to restore justice to people who have paid the time, who have served time, who want to restart their lives, and we should help them do that. This is an opportunity for Pennsylvania to be a leader in restorative justice, and this will truly have an impact on quite a few people as a result of helping them to avoid some of the problems that they're facing as they try to get back into the workforce. There are more than 30 occupational fields that require a license or certificate in Pennsylvania, but even after completing their sentences and returning to the community, many people cannot successfully re-enter the workforce because boards deny licenses based on convictions that were unconnected to the practice of their desired position. Hurting someone's efforts to become a responsible and successful member of the community after they've paid their sentence paid for their crime, is never part of a court sentence. But inadvertently, that has become the case. It benefits no one, and it hurts the community along with the individual. We want to add balance and predictability to the occupational license process and enable returning offenders to actually plan and work towards worthwhile goals when they come back to our communities. Think of the families that this will impact. Think of in this time of relatively low unemployment, how beneficial this will be to Pennsylvania's employers as well. This is legislation whose time has come, and I'm proud to be a part of it. And I'm going to ask my colleague in the House, Representative Cheryl DeLosier, to come to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The descriptions that have been given of both of the House and the Senate bill, and those of you that know this process, having a companion bill says just what the senator just said, in the sense that both sides of the building are willing to take a look at this issue. Both sides of the building in the House and the Senate think that this is a priority, and this is something that's good for our entire state as a whole. So the ability for us to take a look at, and as was mentioned, how many boards and commissions we're talking about, I just thought I'd give you an example so that people can put this in the front of themselves, to sit there and talk about the fact of what does this really mean. And to give you that example, we've talked about cosmetology, we've talked about barber. If an individual is, I have Camp Hill in my district, so somebody from Camp Hill is released, they go out and they've been taught the skill of barber, they go out and they go find a job, they get the required licensure classes, they get the certifications, they get all of the things that they are required by the state to get. They go in front of the barber board and they ask for a license, they receive a license, they can go out and practice. Somebody that came out of Muncie doing the stereotypical that cosmetology typically is more female, so somebody comes out of Muncie, she's gone through some training in prison, she wants to get her feet on the ground, she wants to get a good job. She also goes through all of the credentialing of being a cosmetologist. She wants to go out there and serve her community and maybe even open up her own shop if she chooses. She goes to go for her license at the Department of State, and she's told, I'm sorry, you have a conviction, you are not allowed to have a state license because there's a morals clause within the cosmetology board. So that ability to say that, number one, not only was she given training in prison while she was serving her term to better herself when she came out, we as a state are now causing a barrier for that individual who wants to do better, who wants to come out and as has been mentioned, has paid her price, has paid what she made a mistake, but now she can't get a job in something that she's been trained to do. So these bills are not only allowing for that barrier to come down, because her maybe a shoplifting crime has nothing to do with her ability to cut hair, but the ability for her to move forward, become a good tax-paying citizen, not going back into prison. That's all good things for our community. Those are all good things that we want for our community. So the ability for us to take a look at all of these boards and really understand what is necessary to do the job and make sure, yes, do we want our CPAs to have criminal records of embezzlement? No. And that's not the objective here. If there is something that is directly related to doing the job, those are still exceptions. But what we also need to do is also put those exceptions out there and make sure people recognize what those exceptions are before they go through getting the credentialing that they may need in order to go for that license. Because that's some of the feedback that we've also received, is the fact that we don't have clearly delineated what is an exception for certain types of licenses. So we want to make sure that we have that information out there for those that are interested in any of the particular licenses. We want to make sure that that barrier comes down and there's not someone that has the training and has the capabilities to do a job and is told, oh, I'm sorry, because of a record you cannot. So all the way around, it's good for the employees and it's good for the employers. So this bill, and we all agree that it is something that's necessary. It is a continuation of Clean Slate and the coalition, because as you will notice, it's not only one side of an issue or another. We have employers and we have employees. We have AFL-CIO type. We have people representing the owners and the business builders in our chambers. We want to make sure that everybody is on the same side, and I think we can continue that coalition. It worked very well in making Pennsylvania a leader with Clean Slate, and we look forward to doing it again with professional licensure. So with that, I will hand it over to my teammate in the House, Representative Jordan Harris.
Good morning. I am State Representative Jordan Harris, and glad to be here this morning and following what I call my partner in reform, Representative DeLosier, and as well being joined by our two great colleagues in the State Senate. The truth of the matter is that Pennsylvania has far too long had a problem with what I call our archaic and draconian criminal justice system. We send people away, and we are supposed to rehabilitate them. We're supposed to have them come back better than when they went in. But the truth is, many of them come out, and when they come out, they experience barriers that many times send them back to prison. I had a conversation with the secretary who's here today, and we talked about the fact that Pennsylvania's recidivism rate is around 60%. 60%. That costs us about $1.2 billion. 60%. If we could lower the recidivism rate, we would be saving taxpayer dollars, and we can reinvest those dollars into programs that we know benefit Pennsylvania. The only way to lower the recidivism rate is to increase the employment rate for those with criminal records. So when you look at this bill, as I've said with most of the criminal justice stuff that we've done in Pennsylvania, it is truly about jobs and economics. What we're talking about here is a man or woman who has done what we've told them to do. They have reformed and rehabilitated their lives. They've gone to school, whether it's for barbering, whether it's for cosmetology, or whether it's for nursing. But our law still prohibits them from becoming licensed in the field that our academicians have said that they're competent to do. Imagine this. Imagine this being a mother or a father who spent time in being incarcerated. Imagine coming out, and imagine the happiness that you had when you got accepted to nursing school. Imagine the long nights of studying. Imagine all the prerequisites. Imagine putting your children to sleep so that you could get your homework done. Imagine going to graduation day and the joy on your family's face to see that you've changed and turned your life around. Now imagine going to the state board and being denied the license to practice the very field that you were educated in. Imagine the disappointment of that mother or father to not be able to provide for their child. Imagine all of the hundreds of thousands of Pennsylvanians who've changed their lives but are still being hindered because our licensing laws do not allow them to really reintegrate. That is exactly what we're talking about here, and that is exactly why this piece of legislation is extremely important to Pennsylvania and Pennsylvanians. If we're going to move this Commonwealth forward, it has to be about truly removing the barriers. When we put people away, when we give them that time out, we should be just as eager to put them back into our society as we were when we sent them away. The scarlet letter of conviction must be erased if we're serious about moving Pennsylvania forward. This is about economics. This is about jobs. We must become a system of rehabilitation and not retaliation. So I am grateful to stand here again with a great collection of people from the liberal side to the conservative side, from the business side to the workers, removing all of our party ideology, understanding that on this day and this time when we deal with these issues, we're not Democrats or Republicans, we're Pennsylvanians. And we understand that moving Pennsylvania forward is more important than any political plank we may have. What we're doing here with these type of bills is about the people of Pennsylvania. So when we get this to the governor's desk and he signs it, we know that we'll drop that recidivism rate. We know that we'll employ more people. We know that we'll put more money in the coffers because we'll have more taxpayers. We know that we'll be able to fund our education systems even better because we're reducing the money we're spending on recidivism. That's being smart on crime. That's what our criminal justice system should be. And with that, I turn it over to my good friend, the Secretary for the Board of Pardons, Mr. Brandon Flood.
So good morning, everyone. I'm going to keep my remarks brief. This is one of the more common sense pieces of legislation that you'll ever view, and certainly that's reflective of who's all behind us and who's all a part of this coalition. So I'm speaking in two capacities, obviously as Secretary of the Board of Pardons, but also on the local level as Legal Redress Chair for the Greater Harrisburg NAACP. So I see this issue through two different lenses. Obviously with the Board of Pardons, 85% of the applications that we get are for pardons. The other 15% are for commutations. Of those 85%, the top two reasons why people put in for clemency are for employment and to be able to either participate at their children's school or work with vulnerable populations. So I know a lot of people who are looking, who see those barriers for licensing, certainly come through us. And as you know, we certainly still are experiencing a backlog. So the better, to the extent that we can divert folks and people don't have to come through our process, certainly we can devote our time to other applications and reduce that backlog gradually. On the local level, I have, through the NAACP, there are a number of people that come to me and say, hey, listen, am I eligible for a license, or I was denied for a license? What can I do to overcome this disability? As I mentioned, this legislation is common sense in that it takes the subjectivity out of the process. One of the questions that aren't asked, I'm sure, of board members that serve on those 30 occupational professional boards is, what is your position on criminal justice reform, or what is your position on those that were formerly incarcerated? So when you have that subjectivity in the process that's baked into that process, the greater the likelihood that you will have a board member judge someone not on the merits of their qualifications, but merely the existence of that criminal history record. So this is common sense legislation. Certainly, Board of Pardons is supportive of this legislation, and like I said, it's common sense. So I'm gonna keep my remarks brief. So definitely, for anyone here who you reach out to your legislature, any legislators that are not up here, if you're not from the region that are not supportive, certainly we want more people to get behind this legislation. As I said, as Representative Jordan Harris said that, it's not only about economics, it's also about justice as well. So, at the end of the day, it behooves the Commonwealth to make sure that the men and women that are returning, those 20,000 every year that are returning from our Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, that they have the tools that they need to be ordered to successfully reintegrate. So with that, I will introduce our next speaker, who is a friend of mine, the Dauphin County District Attorney, Fran Chardo.
The Criminal History Record Information Act is designed to serve criminal justice, and it's to be used for criminal justice agencies. It has come to be misused. Criminal record information is being used for other purposes. This proposal rectifies that, so that criminal record information is not misused for other purposes, not used to prevent people, former offenders, from being denied the chance to get gainful employment, to pursue their skills learned while they were rehabilitating themselves in prison. This is a very common sense measure that will serve the public good, that will help people who have served their sentences and have learned skills to use those skills in the community and not turn to crime out of frustration because they can't use those skills that they learned. We support, in the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association, this common sense measure, and I'm proud to stand on behalf of the association that we can no longer misuse these former offenses to prevent people from reentering their communities and using the skills that they learned. So we're proud to support that, and I know the business community supports it as well, so I'm proud to introduce Gene Barr, President of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, to speak to the effect it will have on our businesses.
Thank you, Fran. Good morning. My name is Gene Barr. I'm President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. We're the largest broad-based business advocacy group in Pennsylvania. As was previously noted, you see a lot of the same people who were here just a few months ago for Clean Slate. And that's not a coincidence, because this is a pattern of things that we need to do in this Commonwealth. First off, it is the right and it's the just thing to do to give people those opportunities that have been talked about here already. One of the things that I love about this country and this Commonwealth is the spirit of entrepreneurship that we have. And what's incredibly tragic is when you see someone's idea of getting their part of the American dream taken away because of an unreasonable or an unfair hurdle that they have to face, and paying for mistake over and over and over that happened perhaps many decades ago is tragic and it is unfair. I want to see more entrepreneurs created. I want to see more people realize their attempt to make the American dream and to build the kind of opportunities for themselves and their family to build that business that they've always thought about. So it is the fair and the right thing to do. But it's also the smart thing to do the things that we're talking about here. The governor has asked me to co-chair his Workforce Command Center, and we have been hard at work with that along with a number of other secretaries of agencies here in Pennsylvania. One of the things that is abundantly clear that as we move forward on that and look at the numbers is the reason it's a smart thing to do this, along with Clean Slate and other things that the representatives and senators behind me are working on, is we need the people back working. We do not have enough people to fill the jobs that are available in this Commonwealth. And many people are being kept out of those jobs for unfair reasons. I talked to some members and I asked them those people who have made a concerted effort to hire people who are coming out of the criminal justice system, and I asked them about that. They say, you know what? Many cases, they're the best employees I have. They've seen the other side and they don't want to go back there. And they're incredibly loyal when you bring these people back. These are people who are just looking for a chance. So today what we're talking about is giving people a chance to realize that part of the American dream that they have worked so hard for. Again, it's the right thing to do. It's the just thing to do, and it's also the smart thing to do. It's my pleasure now to introduce Brendan Lynch, Staff Attorney for Community Legal Services.
Pardon me. Good morning. Thank you very much. My name is Brendan Lynch. I'm with Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. I'm here today because my colleagues and I in the employment unit at CLS spend our time trying to help people rise out of poverty. People come to us because they have barriers to work. They come to us because they want to work and they want us to help remove those barriers. And easily, by far, the single biggest barrier that people need help with is a criminal record. These are folks for whom a criminal record is a barrier to rising out of poverty. It's been consistently found that the single biggest guarantee against someone going back to prison is a full-time job, a full-time well-paying job. And in Pennsylvania, in many, many fields, a license is a requirement for a middle-class job. So we are extremely excited to see today's legislation. The law that is being sought to be reformed, the Criminal History Record Information Act, is almost 40 years old. It is in dire need of amendment. It has, we feel, been misused regularly to deny people the ability to work based on records which are totally unrelated to the field in which they're seeking to practice. One thing I'll just mention briefly is something that I think the legislature has been advised of on a number of occasions, and something of an issue of public concern is the low rate of child support collection in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And the single biggest reason people don't pay child support is they don't have a job that pays them enough to afford to pay child support. Our clients who come to us want to pay their child support. And if they could get that license to do the work that they've already been trained to do, they could have the kind of middle-class income that would permit them to pay their debts, to support their families, to rise out of poverty, and to pay their child support. So we want to salute Senators DeSanto and Schwank and Representatives Delosier and Harris for their leadership in this issue, and we endorse this bill and hope the legislature will support it. And with that, I will turn it over to Lauren Crisai of the Justice Action Network.
Good morning. My name is Lauren Crisai. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Justice Action Network, which is the largest national bipartisan organization working to reform the criminal justice system at the state and federal level. I'm really excited to see that Pennsylvania is continuing its work towards bipartisanship on criminal justice reform, something the state has really been a leader on over the past couple of years. And I want to thank Senators DeSanto and Schwank and Representatives Harris and Delosier for introducing meaningful occupational licensing reform legislation today, as well as for inviting us to participate in this press conference. For far too long, Pennsylvania's occupational licensing laws have made it difficult for individuals to gain licenses they need for certain professions simply because of the mistakes they've made in the past. Some estimates that we've seen find that unlicensed workers earn 10 to 15% lower wages than licensed workers with similar levels of education, training, and experience. When individuals leave correctional facilities and attempt to re-enter society, finding employment is the number one important factor in preventing recidivism. Yet many individuals can be categorically denied a license based solely on their history with the criminal justice system. When individuals are barred from obtaining an occupational license, it makes it difficult to gain employment in certain fields, which in turn makes it harder to support themselves and their families, increasing their chances of recidivating. And thankfully, though, Pennsylvania has the opportunity to change that because of these bills. This legislation provides a pathway to employment for those who have earned a second chance, which will make Pennsylvania communities safer and the economy stronger. If this bill is enacted, Pennsylvania will join a number of red and blue states that have done similar reforms, ranging from Tennessee to Illinois, Colorado, Oklahoma just passed one a couple months ago, and more. All are recognizing the need for the government to get out of the way and allow individuals to earn a living in the profession that they want to pursue, which I think is key here. And so I'll wrap up by saying thank you again to these bipartisan bill sponsors for filing legislation that will make Pennsylvania a freer, safer, and more prosperous state. We look forward to working with you all towards passing these important bills. And with that, I will turn it over to Anna McClawson, Deputy State Director for Americans for Prosperity. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm not going to be saying anything groundbreaking, because there have been so many of the same points that have been repeated, but they need to be repeated to get into our mind. As she said, I'm the Deputy State Director with Americans for Prosperity, and I am excited to be here for this bipartisan coalition of groups that want to get people back to work. One of the themes that we talked about today have been barriers, and Americans for Prosperity exists to eliminate barriers that are keeping people from realizing their version of the American dream. As it's been said, removing these barriers will give people meaningful work that will help them realize their full potential. Pennsylvania now is a leader in criminal justice reform. We saw this with the same sponsors of the Clean Slate Act, that will continue to lead the way in passing this necessary occupational licensure reform. Our current laws create unnecessary barriers to employment and entrepreneurship. No one can speak better on that than Jean Barr. People with criminal records have a right to get back on their feet. We ask people to do something with their lives once they're released from prison, but we make it so difficult for them to do that. We heard about licensing in nursing. Who can tell a story better than Jordan Harris? I could see that woman in my mind as he was telling that story, who wanted to get back to work. But when they can't get back to work, when an unrelated profession, they might have received a conviction in that profession, that wastes taxpayer dollars. In state correctional institutions, they regularly train people to get a job to come out when they're out of prison, and then they might not be able to practice in their desired field with the passion that they have. It's also a waste of potential in a worker who are ready and able and willing and excited to supercharge our economy. The 21st century presents a lot of challenges for Pennsylvanians trying to improve their lives. Burdensome and irrelevant occupational licenses make it harder, depriving an entire group of people the opportunity to get licensed. That makes things even worse. So by limiting work restrictions on Pennsylvanians with criminal records to situations where the crime directly relates to the job in question, Senate Bill 637, House Bill 1477, that strikes the right balance, addressing safety concerns and helping former prisoners realize their full potential. I look forward to working with everyone up here. This is such a great, diverse coalition of people excited and willing to reach across the aisle and to work with all of us to get this legislation passed and a reality for the people who need it most in Pennsylvania. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve Bloom, the Vice President of the Commonwealth Foundation.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you to both senators and both representatives for your leadership on this critical issue. The Commonwealth Foundation works to transform free market ideas into sound public policy so all Pennsylvanians can flourish. And that's what this whole initiative is about. Pennsylvania's criminal justice laws can and should protect public safety while also ensuring that people who serve their time and repay their debt are able to re-enter society productively. People returning to society from prison are far less likely to repeat offenses if they can find a job. But Pennsylvania's outmoded occupational licensing laws short-sightedly restrict job opportunities for those who need them the most. This contributes to our Commonwealth being chronically burdened with the highest incarceration rates in the entire Northeast. Within 3 years of release, nearly 61% of our former inmates return to prison. The reality is, unnecessary licensing laws are boxing qualified people out of making a decent living. Pennsylvania's vague statutes and overly broad automatic licensing bans are preventing ex-offenders from going to work instead of going back to jail. For example, Amanda Spillane was denied a cosmetology license due to past crimes related to her drug addiction. Now sober, she is suing for her right to earn a living using her skills as an esthetician. We're here today because it's long past time to reduce barriers for work for people like Amanda and everyone in Pennsylvania. In June of 2018, Governor Wolf wisely proposed ending Pennsylvania's counterproductive 10-year occupational bans for anyone convicted of a drug felony, and he recommended eliminating 13 licenses. Lawmakers should be eager to enact sensible licensing reforms and stop arbitrarily denying opportunity to all Pennsylvanians, including ex-offenders trying to improve their lives. The kind of reform legislation we're talking about today is truly a no-brainer. In one bill, we can start solving Pennsylvania's shortage of workers with career and technical training, we can protect public safety and reduce recidivism, and we can help more hardworking people raise their incomes and their quality of life. Here are some of the common sense solutions we at the Commonwealth Foundation support. Repeal automatic work bans. This is a critical step toward creating licensing processes that assess each applicant's unique credentials and circumstances. Eliminate overly broad terms. Licensing board in Pennsylvania use vague and subjective language that too often becomes a de facto work ban for former offenders. Examples include good moral standing and crimes of moral turpitude. Strengthen the scope of inquiry requirements. Pennsylvania limits its licensing boards to consideration of felonies and occupation-related misdemeanors. The law could be improved by eliminating consideration of older offenses, lesser offenses, and felonies unrelated to the occupation under consideration. Offer preemptive evaluation. 7 states have laws allowing anyone with a criminal record to petition a licensing board for an early determination of whether their record will disqualify them from licensing before they enroll in an expensive training program. And continue to reassess the value of occupational licenses. Recently, states from Michigan to Nebraska to Rhode Island have eliminated occupational licenses for nutritionists, auctioneers, nurses, massage therapists, lab scientists, audiologists, barbers, and cosmetologists. We should consider doing the same. Let's stop blocking qualified people from going to work. Thank you.
We'll have Anna McCausland. Is she here? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. Okay, it's a long list there. Well, that ends our presentation. We'll be available for questions unless you'd like to ask them of the group, but we'll be here to answer individual questions. Yes.
So can these bills get to the governor's desk by the end of June?
We're working for that. I don't know that we'll get there, but we're trying.
Will there be any ex-offenders who are not eligible, or is there any guidance for, like, so-called violent offenders under this bill?
Well, this doesn't anticipate repeat violent offenders, being eligible for this program. We're working on some additional language and work. I think Brandon would have a lot to say with that, and some of our other sponsors here. I don't want to answer all the questions if anybody does. Go ahead.
For it seems like there's a consensus that crimes, whether they're felonies or misdemeanors, that are related to an occupation are not going to be given licenses. Who decides what's related?
Well, I think that's why we're redoing the licensing issue here and tightening up the language in the board. That Steve Bloom did a very good job there, because there's a lot of vague terms. So, it'll have to go into the various agencies and work on the language to tighten that up to make sure the intent of the legislation is carried out.
So, and this is again, I know it's still subject to change, but say a person was arrested for robbing a convenience store and then they want to become a hairdresser. Often hairdressers have access to a cash register because they have to take money. Is that considered related?
Well, I don't think that's defined yet, and that's kind of a gray area. It's a good question, but I think we need to really stop these automatic blocking of people obtaining these licenses. And I think District Attorney Chardo said it well. If this thing's happened decades ago and you've been leading a good life, why should you be blocked from that? Does anybody else want to? Go ahead, George. I'm sorry.
I mean, to your question, the reality is right now as it stands, many people who have felonies in Pennsylvania are automatically locked out of employment, right? So taking your example, I mean, if I have a felony drug charge, what does that matter about me cutting hair? Not only that, in prison, we're training people to be barbers. Right. So it's kind of counterproductive in several ways. One, we're spending resources to educate folks to do something that our licensing says they won't be able to do. And two, when they get out, because they can't become gainfully employed, they become a part of the 60% of folks that recidivate. So when you talk about stuff like that, just think about people with felonies. I mean, we've done a clean slate that dealt with misdemeanors, but just think about the felony population. Many of them are X'd out of a variety of jobs simply because of that felony. So what this does is it says, let us now not just look at the fact that you have a felony, let's actually deep dive into what the crime was that you committed, and then let us assess if that crime has anything to do with what you're trying to do. Do I care if you have a felony when I want to go and get my car at an auction? Do I care if the auctioneer has a felony for a drug charge? I think most reasonable adults would say no. Just get to that number quick that I can afford to pay so I can get this car and I can get out of here. It has nothing to do with what you did 10 and 15 years ago. And I think that's the true aim of what we're trying to do with this legislation.
And understanding that, so that will be up to the licensing board, though?
To a certain degree, yes, it will be. One of the things that's written into the legislation, I want to read this so I get it, get all the facts in place. The board itself would have more opportunity to actually consider other factors, because the example you gave is a good one. You handle cash in so many different occupations. So saying it's not directly related to that isn't necessarily always true. But they also have to consider the nature of the offense, the amount of time that has passed, which Representative Harris talked about, evidence of the applicant's fitness to actually practice the occupation, and subsequent conduct by the applicant as well. So yes, there's some subjectivity in that, but we're telling the advisory boards through this legislation, you need to have that. You really need to consider the individual in the particular case.
Would you say this gives the licensing board wide discretion, or is the legislation more prescriptive as it stands now?
I would think that we're trying to be. I think we are trying to be more prescriptive in making them look at the whole person, looking at the nature of the crime, looking at the length of time since the crime committed, and if the felony or other criminal record really pertains. So we are trying to be more prescriptive and eliminate the broadness of it.
And take a look at the also, the issue of who makes up the boards. So when the governor makes his appointments to the professional boards, it's made up of a variety of individuals. It's made up of those in the industry. So they have the full knowledge of what is needed in order to perform the duties. It's also made up of public people that don't have any relation to the board. And that's done on purpose, so that you have somebody from kind of a third party that says, well, me as the public does not see that this is an issue. So if you take a look at the boards, and that's why giving them the ability to take a look at it a little more broadly, you're bringing in professionals that are doing the job now, and what is this going to do to my profession? And that's what they're going to be looking at. But also on those boards are public people who don't have any insight into this profession, but have the public's opinion to bring to it, to say, hey, look, I'm an average citizen of Pennsylvania. If I go to get my hair cut, I don't care. Or we're using Jordan's example of an auction or something like that. So the ability for that public perception is also on each and every one of these licensure boards.
Are there any estimates of how many people are denied licenses annually?
That I don't know. You said
No.
earlier.
Yeah, yeah, I don't have that information, but it's also important to bear in mind that it's not just about the issuance of licenses. So it's also about the renewal and the revocation thereof as well, too. So I know previous Commissioner Ian Harlow, one of the things that when this discussion was first broached was looking at the emphasis would be mostly on anyone that currently had a license that incurred a conviction, or someone who incurred a conviction while in the commission of practicing their craft. So most of the emphasis will be on whether someone was a previous license holder when they incurred the crime, or if they actually committed the crime in the course of in the commission of their profession. So I just wanted to clarify that too.
So what is I mean, obviously, you're recommending, right? You're giving the boards the ability to have a greater, kind of broader, more holistic approach to giving out these licenses. But you obviously can't force the board to say, oh, well, you have to consider these factors. What are the chances that a board, perhaps, because there is such, such a stigma against people who have been incarcerated, what are the chances that a board kind of completely ignores this and just continues to
We have the opportunity to appoint these members to the board, and I often receive letters from individuals who want to serve on these boards. It's incumbent on us to take very seriously to look at the resumes of those individuals and the qualifications that they bring to this particular position, so that they can we have a good understanding and have that conversation with them about making sure that they look at this issue very carefully. I don't want to see any rogue board necessarily.
Well, in the appointment of these people, I think one of you mentioned that under the current way that this works, often we don't get a sense of how a person stands on criminal justice issues, for whether they have some issue with former offenders.
But to your point, that's an appealable issue. I mean, an abuse of discretion by one of these boards can be appealed to the Commonwealth Court.
But what I'm saying is that a board member could they could come up with a number of reasons why they might deny, somebody's license. It's not always going to be so clear cut as, oh, well, this person has a criminal record, so we're not going to say that. So my question is, how is there any sort of, how do you guys plan on ensuring that, if this bill gets passed, it becomes law, how do you plan on ensuring that everybody is actually being given a fair chance?
Well, you have to hope that public officials are going to discharge their duties with fidelity. And this makes clear that this is only a factor. And it has to be relevant to the particular calling and factor. And it can be appealed.
Are there any plans to kind of retrain or, reorient the sitting board, since they'll be now administering a component of the criminal justice system?
I think you have to keep in mind, just want to go to that one last point again, sort of to your point as well. The Department of State has oversight on this, but more importantly to me, I received a number of very negative social media comments when Brandon was appointed to his current position. And I responded to those that I absolutely think that somebody like Brandon should be in that position. He is a living example of somebody who's turned his life down, he's engaging, and I think you're seeing with the bipartisanship here within the legislature and the way people are rethinking about crime and its costs, that the board members are going to be held to a higher standard, not only by the State Department, but by legislatures and people like Brandon Flood going, I'm in your face, here's what we can do, and we're going to get it done.
Great answer.
You like that one?
Just to follow up once more on how this board's going to be appointed, are there going to be changes in the considerations taken when putting someone on this thing?
The governor does that, so that's,
All the boards.
so that's not,
Okay.
yeah.
That's not going to be part of this law?
No. But we do get the chance because
Senate
they
approves, right,
They
confirms.
petition us. The Senate, the Senate has that opportunity. And I often, as I said, receive letters from board members who are interested in being on these boards. And I call them and I interview them.
Right, I
That's
think-
my job.
I think what you're missing, and this kind of is all three of your questions. There's a good moral clause in the language now. So anything could be that. I mean, you could utilize that. So even when you're appealing, you limit your appeal because the legislation says moral clause. So the board members actually have a leg to stand on currently in the appeal because of the good moral clause thing. So when you remove that out of the way, if they're still doing the wrong thing, when you go for an appeal, you got to understand those legal maneuvers that they were using in the past will no longer be there because we're removing them from the statute. So I think, to your point, I think that gets to what the district attorney was talking about when these things actually go up on appeal. There will no longer be this ground to just be able to say, this person didn't have a good moral character. We're removing those. What does that even mean, a good moral character? Did I not take out my mother's trash yesterday? Does that mean I don't have a good moral character? I don't know what it means. I mean, my mom's not here, but she may tell you it is. But you know what I mean? But we're removing that subjectivity in this process, and I think that's where you'll get to helping many Pennsylvanians to move their lives forward.
And just to clarify on that statutory level, so the moral clause is going away. There was one other thing I think that's getting cut out.
I'm sorry?
What else is changing on the statutory level? So the moral clause is going away.
Right. And, just broad, undefined language that he's relating to as well. So we're going to wrap it up.
And
You have something?
just the notifications,
Yeah.
is the fact of what is qualified ahead of time.
Right.
Those are two big parts of it.
That's the big. But we're going to wrap it up. People have other time constraints, but we'll be here for further questions. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate the attendance.